10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You have entered Untold Radio AM. And now broadcasting from a secret location, your hosts, Joel Sturgis and Doug Hijack. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me is Mr. Doug Hijack. Doug, how the hell are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Well, I'm freezing is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's just too damn cold for February. It's just too cold.
What's the temp up there?
Right now, we're sitting at a balmy 13 degrees above zero.
Yeah. Well,
and I get it. It's winter, and I get it. There's people that love the snow, and I get all that stuff. But I'm so done with winter. I don't know about you, but I'm so done.
Spring's coming, man.
It is coming. What have you been up to? Anything fun?
Not really. Nothing fun. I won't be doing anything fun till spring.
Yeah.
Work every day.
I'm looking forward to going four-wheeling again with you.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. That's coming up. We got that in June again.
Yeah.
So, be a good time.
Did you realize that yesterday was kind of a weird day?
It was that 2-2 thing that was going on.
And it was on a Tuesday, which was really weird.
It is really weird. It was a weird 2-2 Tuesday day.
And apparently, Joel, it only happens every 248 years.
So we sat through history yesterday that no one has seen,
Exactly.
248 years.
Yeah. If you even care about a digital date time combo, it was weird. It was very coincidental. But in 90 years from now, there's going to be the same thing in 2111. So 2111. There'll be some other weird.
Did you notice any difference during your Tuesday?
Twice I looked at the clock yesterday.
Yeah.
And it came up as 11:11.
Do you ever have numbers that follow you though? Like you'll look up and that number just seems to be ever present in your life.
It's 11:11 for me, man.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's constant.
Mine is like 7. A lot of 7s in my life. And I don't know why. Like 7 a.m. I'm always up at 7 this, 7 that. It's really strange. Now I know that there's something behind that, but I'm not sure exactly. Maybe sometime we should have a numerologist on the show to explain that to us. Maybe,
that would be interesting.
What these numbers mean and how they influence us and stuff like that one of these days in the show, which I think would be super cool.
I need to take you to the casino and play a slot machine.
But that's the thing. I never win. Unlike you, Doug, that can walk in and jackpots just start flowing. I don't win very often.
Well, I got to take you to a 7 machine that just has the 7s. You hit the 7s.
Yeah. I could give that a try. I could. I've been told that I'm a cooler. That people be winning, I'll show up, and that's it. No one's winning anymore.
We'll have to find out.
Yeah. That would be interesting to find out. I think that everyone has their numbers. Mine's 7, yours is 11. If we were playing craps, those would be good numbers.
Yeah, they would.
They would be very good numbers.
I've never played craps, and I don't know. Doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah. How about roulette?
Nope.
Never roulette either.
I've not played it, but I'm not into it.
Yeah. You tried it and that was fun, and then you're done, kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah. Roulette is one of those things. I know craps. I have played craps. I did all right, but it wasn't anything like, oh my God, this is the greatest game ever for me. I know some people really love them, and some people love the dice. Not this guy so much.
No, me either. So yesterday I did have a cooking disaster.
Another one.
One of my famous cooking.
Oh.
So I wanted to make a bratwurst, right? I wanted to put butter on the bread and then toast it.
Toast
You know,
the
get it
bread.
crispy, to get it kind of, and put a little ketchup
Yeah.
on there and toast it, and then put the you cook like a bratwurst in a pan of butter, so you get it kind of a little burnt and tasty. Anyhow, so all of a sudden I look and the freaking flames are coming out of the toaster.
Why? Why you know?
Butter caught on fire.
Wait. You put buttered bread into the toaster.
I've never tried it. I wanted to see.
There's a reason why people don't try that, Doug.
Well, I wanted to.
Because things burst into flames.
Well, normally I would heat the oven up and put it in the oven and get it all, like kind of this. It's a different kind of crispy. When you butter it first and then you toast it, it's a completely different kind of crispy. Can't put my finger on it. But don't do it in the toaster.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
You might not want to do that anymore, Doug. I mean, your insurance guy, if he listens to this show, he's probably tearing his hair out right
Actually,
now. What?
He does. That's what's weird about it. He actually does. Swear to God. He's a friend. And so he knows about it and he listens to it.
and every time that he listens and we talk about your kitchen mishaps, your premium is raised just a little bit.
Yeah, we'll have to erase these episodes if anything happens.
Yeah, right. We didn't hear. Nope, nothing. What are you talking about? We didn't hear anything.
My God.
Yeah.
So some guy writes me a letter yesterday, and it kind of put me on a path. He goes, "Oh man, this random nautica.
What the hell is this random nautica? I've heard of it in passing,
and I'd never heard of it. Never heard of it. So then I'm like, of course I'm real cool. I didn't say to him, "Hey, what does that mean?" I start Googling it.
Yeah,
and apparently, and I just talked to my other son about it because he knew all about it. So it's apparently there's a random number generator, and you give your area, and then you apparently have like some wish, like you wish to find something happy, and it generates some random coordinates, GPS coordinates.
Okay.
And then it's supposed to, be a special place for you based on the positive thinking or influence brains have on.
I'm on their website, by the way, right now. Since you mentioned it,
good.
I popped it in there, so I'm kind of looking at what it is, and it's the world's first and only quantumly generated create your own adventure app.
Yes.
Explore the world you never knew existed.
So, like, if you did it, you'd probably think big fish, right, in your brain.
I might.
You would give coordinates right into the middle of a lake.
Sure, right in the middle of Lake Superior. That's where I'd end up. I'm sure of it.
But people have been having some real interesting thing, and of course, it goes viral. Like, there's been bodies recovered, money recovered, all sorts of weird stuff.
I have heard now you bring it up, and now it's jogging my memory.
Yeah,
I have heard tales of random nautica, and not all of them have been good.
Okay, but I have a question for you. You're online. I'm not. Okay. Is it Randon, like DON? Because that's what everybody.
Yes, Randon.
I wonder what.
Rando Nautica. Actually, it's Rando.
Oh, Rando
Nautica.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, Rando Nautica.
You would think like if it was me, I would change it to Random Nautica.
Well, you could and start your own website and do a competitive, then compete with it, I suppose. If you want to do
8-minute abs versus 7-minute abs.
Yeah. I guess save that minute.
Okay, so apparently it's gaining controversy. As there's been numerous reports on the app generating coordinates that seemingly coincidentally where people are finding disturbing things.
I'm seeing a lot of that since I Googled it. The first things that really popped up were, news stories about its controversy. Is Random Nautica or is Rando Nautica safe? Is Randonautica used for trafficking?
Yeah.
Are Randonautica stories real? How do you play Randonautica? So there's lots of different things on here. Are you thinking about downloading it and trying it?
Heck no, that's not me. That's so not me.
I'm thinking about doing it.
Well, that would be you. Yeah, you're the ghost hunter guy, the brave.
Think about trying it. Maybe get a couple friends together. That way I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Well,
I would do it. I would do it maybe with some people.
I don't think I'd do it by myself.
Yeah.
I'm too chicken for that. Because what if the world being what it is, it puts you in a place like criminal activities going on, right? That would not be good. So, but you also have to use your brain while you're going there, I'm sure. If it's looking sketchy, it's looking like a place you shouldn't be, then you probably shouldn't go. Just because the app tells you go there doesn't mean you have to go there.
That's true. And we have Alex tonight directing. Have you ever heard of this, Alex?
He's told me a little bit about it.
So, but you hadn't heard of it until when? I mean, when did you first hear about this application?
About maybe 6 months ago.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Are you gonna try it, Alex?
I mean,
Alex,
we'll give you a GoPro. All right. Don't worry.
Well, let's hope that GoPro is, sending it to you wirelessly, because you might never see me again.
Well, that's true. We got to be able to get wirelessly because, obviously, if, God forbid your demise were to happen, Alex, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, you don't want to lose that footage.
We don't want to lose the footage. I mean, we don't want to lose two things in one day.
Oh my gosh.
That'd be horrible.
So, okay. So here's a good time. And obviously Alex is directing this. And if you'll notice this week, we don't have a live show on YouTube. We did last week. So me and Joel, we're getting our studios visually and some technology remodeling done at the studios. And we're hoping next Wednesday we will be live with video on YouTube. Correct?
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, so that will be the start. Last week was just a dry run.
That means you have to wear pants during the show.
You'll have to wear pants. You'll have to do your hair. Put your hat on, your favorite hat, whatever.
Yeah. Just for everyone that might be listening later to this, I'm getting a lot of reports. You're not on the radio tonight. No, we're not. We're trying this new. So if you are picking this up later on, we're going to be kind of shifting our focus to something completely new and awesome.
But we may be able to be on the radio live also, doing the simulcast thing. So we'll have to talk about that. But I believe we will be able to.
I sure hope so. We'll get that figured out.
Yep.
We'll definitely get that figured out.
So, what else we got going on here? But I just have this feeling, Alex, if you do it, you'll find like some uncovered pit in the woods. Don't do it. Just don't do it, Alex. You're like me. Don't do it.
Yeah, I'm going to see that pit right when I look down and it's below me.
Just be safe, Alex. All joking aside, I mean, do I think you should take one for the team? Well, how expendable are you?
I mean, if we get that footage back, it'd probably go viral.
Oh,
I'm just kidding, of course. Just kidding. But you're right. I'm reading now. I'm digging more and more. You're right, though. There is a dark side to the Randonautica, it would seem.
Yeah.
And so people have reported being assaulted. The people have reported coming up on criminal activity. So be careful. I guess at the end of the day, here's our little disclaimer: proceed at your own risk. We're not telling you to do it.
And respect private property.
Exactly. Do not be trespassing or doing this or doing that. Yeah. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it.
Yep.
There you go. For a lot of things in life. Hey, we got great guests tonight, by the way.
Yes.
I want to bring that in. We have Kevin Randle on the show tonight, and he is a retired Army lieutenant colonel. He served in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot and aircraft commander. So it will be really interesting. But he is more known. Well, he's not more known, but what he's doing these days is he is one of the foremost writers and contributors on the subject of UFOs.
Yeah.
So that will be a lot of fun talking with him.
I've known about Kevin for many, many years. And I was surprised that I got a request from his book publisher to get Kevin on. And I'm like, heck yeah.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I was looking him up and getting ready for the show, and he has done a lot of stuff.
He is the real deal, man.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. I love the subjects of the UFOs, though.
He's also very no nonsense. Very, very, give me the facts and that's it.
Yeah.
Kind of guy.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's what you need out there in the field too.
Yep.
It's just somebody that's very down to earth and pragmatic, and is there for the facts, no matter where they take them.
Yep. So you know we're going to be on YouTube, and so I'm like, and I've never done content really for YouTube, and I don't really know much about it, but I'm starting to look at videos that get lots of views, right?
Yeah.
And I was so amazed that there's all these views. In fact, I consider it a phenomena of these like 6-second videos. 6 seconds, 7 seconds.
Yeah, they're just those little quick bite-sized videos.
But they're getting millions of views, and I'm trying to figure this out. Is it even worth clicking a 6-second video?
Well, look at platforms like TikTok, right?
Yeah, but that's apparently is that the trend? That's little quick scroll.
Yeah, they're kind of. I think. Right, Alex. I mean, not to bring it back in, but TikTok is that short format, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. It's invaded everything. Facebook's copied them. YouTube's trying to get in on the action with the YouTube Shorts.
Yeah. I was gonna say, because I remember hearing about the tick of the talk there, and it was catering to that small, short, quick videos. And so that does seem to be the thing that's coming, Doug.
But listen to these titles. Okay, you got to hear this. Cutest Smile. That's the name. That's the title. It's 9 seconds long. 59 million views. There's networks out there that spend billions of dollars that cannot get that kind of views.
But it speaks to the power of social media because, again, at its heart, TikTok, YouTube, all this is all social media, Doug.
All it is, the video, let me describe it. It's a cute girl, young girl. And it looks like she's on a bus or something. And she just looks at the camera and smiles. That's
just
it.
Smiles.
Wholesome.
Yeah.
But 59 million views, Joel, is some serious.
Insane. I mean, like you said, for instance, there's a show on AMC that was huge called Remember The Walking Dead? Remember when they were, they never even got 59 million views on one show.
No, are you kidding? I mean, a really hit show is going to do like 4, 5, 6 million views.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket compared to 59 million views.
Yeah. Okay.
That's insanity.
But I got to go through some more of these. This is really a kind of a weird phenomena. So another one, amazing toddler can speak African language. It's 6 seconds, 5 million views right away. The audio is bad, and the kid just kind of mumbles. I mean, I think it's clickbait, you know what I mean, or whatever. But I think people's curiosity, it's a cute kid. There's no doubt it's cute, but does it warrant 5 million views? I don't know.
Yeah, to somebody, I guess it does. I mean, but I mean, gosh, because it kind of makes you wonder. I mean, is the content that matters or the way you word it to make them click?
Know.
I mean,
it's a phenomenon.
Now, in order to register, I suppose all they have to do is click that play button. It doesn't matter if they stay for the whole thing or not. It's been clicked.
Okay.
So yeah, that's nuts.
Okay, so I'm going to read just a few titles, and then how many millions of views they've had. Here's one. It's the title. I don't have time to gossip. It's 5 seconds long, 48 million views.
Jesus.
Okay, next one. Let's see. Another one. Why are you running? 56 million views. It's 7 seconds.
Wow.
Now here's one with actually some content. Kid farts while singing. That's it. That's the title.
That's the title, right?
It's 18 seconds. So we're talking deep, big production here. 4.5 million views only. It's a failure by those other ones.
only 4.5 million.
Here's another one. This is once again a very deep topic called before and after lunch. That's it. That's quick.
it. That's
Before
it.
and after lunch, 16 seconds long, 2.5 million views in
I
2
mean,
months.
can you imagine the views you get if you would have been filming yourself starting a fire in the toaster?
Look, Monster Quest show I produced has been on for, let's say it's 6-7 months.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 to 2 million views. But my God, it's it cost $250,000 plus to make one of those.
Yeah, where somebody grabs their cell phone and they make a video.
So another one, I'll get you a B. I'll get you B, meaning what B?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get you B, 6 seconds long, 8.1 million views. Another one, you got cheese, 22 seconds long, 39 million views.
So,
oh my God, it's killing me. It's killing me, Joel.
I would imagine it is.
So what I thought, maybe me and you can get together and we can start, we could take a day and we could produce 20, 30, 40 of these 7-second videos.
But I think part of it, though, Doug, is it's spontaneous.
No, we'll fake everything.
No, but what I'm saying is their videos.
We'll do one.
Spontaneous.
No. We'll go out. We'll do one. We'll do one really quick, and we'll do one called "There's a Cockroach in My Underwear." It'll be 6 seconds long. I mean, come on. That'll get 100 million views.
Yes, it will.
I'll have you do one. We'll do one that's called "The Hot Dog Is Cold."
The hot dog is cold.
7 seconds.
On fire.
That's good for 20, 30 million.
Oh, it's gotta be.
How about my cousin is weird? We'll go meet your cousin.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But it can only be 6 seconds long, mind you.
But yeah, they're devoid of any kind of real, I guess, content. I mean, they're just so quick.
Well, no, but I want to get you on your ATV.
Yeah.
We'll set up a really high jump, a really.
No, I'm good. I think that's what you should do.
No, you. And then we'll just call it "My ATV Can Defy Gravity."
Yeah.
4 seconds.
Yeah. Then I would be doing no more videos after that because guess what? I'd be dead, Doug. I'd be dead.
Well, they don't have to know that. We're going to cut it off after 4 seconds.
But that would have to be the last video then.
Well, we can strap pillows on you or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Bubble wrap.
Bubble wrap. We can put duct tape and bubble wrap.
Sure. That'll work just fine.
But we'll make $200,000 just that one Saturday. We'll make that much in YouTube.
In one Saturday, and we do a video. I mean, really, with your star power, it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Well, I'll direct everything. We'll just make 20 or 30 of these 4 or 5 second videos.
They got Bigfoot walking in the woods and just have a guy in costume.
With a clickbait title, of course.
Yeah. Have a guy with abnormally big feet walking.
Yeah, we like my boat sunk.
Yeah,
I tripped on my shoelace. Things like that.
My shoelace.
Yeah. Okay, enough of that crap. Oh my God. I'm serious.
You know what? I know you are, and that's what A, terrifies me, and B, intrigues me.
Yeah.
That's something like this just can be so popular.
And then, of course, we're going to film it with a camera, right? Some kind of camera that's going to have a little lithium battery, right? And a little lithium battery. So we can, shoot all day, these 6 second videos. Maybe we can do 50 of them in a day. But I just found out yesterday that we're looking at a lithium shortage in a time.
I heard that today at work. In fact, I was told that there's a lithium shortage that's going to be happening.
We only have 30 to 90 million tons. So you take 30 to 90 million times 2,000 pounds is about a ton. And that's not much. And
not really.
The whole world of lithium?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that ain't going to be good.
I know they've been kicking around the idea of making iron-ion batteries.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but they probably won't work as good and they'll be heavier.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would imagine they would be. I mean, iron is such a heavy metal.
But here's what I don't get, Joel. Lithium batteries only last a finite amount of charges.
Yeah.
So then there you have to be destroyed, and they're very toxic, but I would imagine they can reclaim some of the lithium. That's what I'm thinking.
I would
I don't
imagine
really
they could. There's got to be some recycling method they have. Otherwise, we're looking with all these Teslas, right?
Yeah, well,
We're looking
all these
at,
electric cars.
I mean, they're trying to save the planet by being electric. Well, they're going to destroy the planet when they have to dispose of these
Yeah, but
things.
people don't realize that, in mining, to mine lithium, that produces a ton of greenhouse gases.
Oh,
You still have
hugely.
to produce the plastic and all the metal that, the car, the rubber.
Well, look how many places in America we're still using coal to create electricity.
What I'm trying to get at, there's no free lunch.
No,
I
there is
like
not.
an ideal society to me where there's a number of different options for powering your home,
Sure.
driving your car. Some people have gas, some people have electric, whatever fits.
Yeah.
Some people have electric bikes, some people don't have electric bikes, some people have a gas motorcycle. They're coming out with electric Harleys and motorcycles. Just kind of where you can pick yourself what you want to invest in.
I personally don't see electric cars ready for prime time quite yet.
Oh boy, I tell you, my son bought one, and I'm like,
yeah, but then you got to be set up to charge them. You have the infrastructure in your home.
Yep.
And what if you do run out of juice in the middle of a road trip?
Or just what if the power goes out for a month? Or a week,
right?
2 weeks,
right. I mean, that puts more on the grid at that point.
I like electric car. I mean, I'd love to have an electric car, but I would love to have a small gas engine in it.
Yeah.
That you can use as kind of a,
auxiliary.
Kind of like a Prius.
Yeah.
That's kind of a weird deal where they have batteries that run the car once you get up to speed and the motor shuts off and then turns on. That's kind of a cool concept.
It is a cool concept.
So you're not stuck.
But they're not refined yet to the point to where it is. They have to be able to charge as fast as I can fill my gas tank.
Well, one thing I was looking at is ocean water has 2 parts per million of lithium in it. So you could possibly get lithium, from the ocean.
How many gallons though we'd have to harvest?
Oh my God, at 2 parts per million.
So it would be a lot of water. It would be a lot of water.
I mean, so it's a very interesting, vital element. It is cool though. Here, let me tell you how great lithium batteries are. I charged all my lithium batteries before winter, probably in October. All of them are totally charged. They're still all full. So not like lead acid that just constantly drain.
Yeah, I mean they do. They're great in that regard. They hold charge a very long time.
Yep.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, guys. Looks like Kevin's in the studio.
Yeah, great. Let's Joel, do you want to introduce him?
Yeah, we have the great Kevin Randle joining us tonight. And let me go ahead and get my notes out here. Okay, Kevin Randle's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, served in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot and aircraft commander, and Iraq as a battalion intelligence officer. Well, thank you for your service, Kevin. He began his writing career contributing to UFO magazines. For more than 40 years, he's published more than 100 books, including science fiction, action, adventure, and almost 30 books about UFOs. He has appeared in dozens of TV shows and documentaries and hundreds of radio programs. He hosts the blog Different Perspective, Vietnam Ground Zero, and the Science Fiction Site. You can hear Kevin on various platforms such as X Zone Radio and Coast to Coast AM, where he does a weekly segment. I'd like to welcome Kevin Randle to the show.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Kevin. This is Doug. Really, first thing I want to do is thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your service. That's something else. But really what blows me away, Kevin.
Yes.
100 books?
Well, I stopped counting at 125.
Ooh.
That is an accomplishment, my friend.
Well, I had co-authors on some of them, so
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing.
That really is amazing. It truly is. Well,
That's
Kevin,
incredible.
we talked a little bit about your military background, and that again, thank you for your service. But what got you into UFOs?
I always blame my mother. She had an interest in science fiction, which deals with alien visitation and alien civilizations and interstellar flight. And she took me to a movie, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. And that kind of sparked my interest because UFOs deals with alien civilizations and alien visitation and interstellar flight. So it kind of evolved from her interest in science fiction and the science fiction movies of the 1950s.
Okay. So it wasn't like, hey, I saw a UFO, guys, or have you seen a UFO, Kevin?
Yeah, that's a question I used to dodge because the sighting is so crummy.
Mhm.
I hesitate to mention it, but I was a member of the Denver UFO Society when I was growing up in Colorado. And we had a meeting near Castle Rock, weekend meeting. I think it just went late into the night. And we were sitting around the campfire and we watched a light cross the sky from south to north. It got directly overhead, blinked once and continued on. And somebody said, "Oh, look, they're signaling at us." Well, my friend at the time and I, when we got home, we tried to find out if there was a satellite in a position for us to see it at that time in that kind of an orbit and couldn't find anything that matched what we'd seen. So basically, I saw a light cross the sky. Took 4 or 5 minutes, something like that, and that was it. Just a bright light, a little bigger than a star, but not much else.
Wow, that's cool though. I mean, that's more than what a lot of people see right there.
Yep. So Kevin, I really, a lot of people don't know about this UFO flap that we're going to talk about that your book is based on. Do you want to kind of set the stage for this flap and give us kind of the overview of it, and then we can get into some of these amazing details? Because this really was amazing.
It began about 3:00 in the morning on November 2nd, 1957, in a town called Canadian, Texas, where a object was seen landed on the highway, and two fellows were stopped by this thing. One was a civilian whose name has been redacted from the Air Force files, and I can't get a lead on who it was. The other one was an Air Force NCO, and his name is in the file. So we know who he was. We got a brief description of what they had seen. The object took off and everything returned to normal. Later in the evening, around 8:00 in the evening, a couple heading toward Amarillo, or as I like to call it, Armadillo, Amarillo, Texas, which is also in the panhandle of Texas, as is in Canadian, Texas. Entered a mist area and their car stalled and the lights went out and that sort of thing. When the object that was kind of hidden in the mist disappeared, took off, they couldn't get their car started again, and they discovered their battery was drained. It was dead, and they got a ride into Amarillo, reported it to the police. The police, being the efficient organization that they were at the time, didn't bother to write down the names, but we do have a description of what they looked like, which in 2021 or 2022 isn't doing us any good at all. Just a young couple, and they did send a sheriff or a police officer out to look at the site, and he saw nothing, but that was basically it. We get about 10:30 at night. A fellow named Pedro Saucedo, who lived in the Levelland area, is talked about as being a part-time barber, a part-time farmhand. I was giving more credit for that because he was a veteran of the Korean War, so I figure he gets some credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
Was driving toward Levelland when his pickup truck, the engine stopped, the lights went out, the radio filled with static. He was so frightened by what he had seen, he dived out of the driver's side door and rolled under the truck. His passenger sat there petrified. What they'd seen is a bright glowing blue object that he called torpedo shape come down and land near the pickup truck. Once it took off, according to Saucedo, it turned a bright red or orange red, bright color, and it took off. And once it was gone, he could start his pickup truck. But he was so frightened by the experience, he didn't want to continue to Levelland. He went to another small town in the area and called the sheriff, called the police department. And of course, they didn't believe him. thought he was drunk. But over the next 2 hours, they got multiple calls from people reporting basically the same thing. A bright red glowing object landed, passed over their truck close at hand, stalled the engine, put out the lights, filled the radio with static. After about 2 hours of this, 2 or 3 hours of this, the sheriff, and I hate his name, Ware Clem, I wish it was something good like, Jack Armstrong.
Yeah.
But that was his name, which we really shouldn't draw any conclusions based on his crummy name. He led what I call a small convoy, 3 cars. He was in a sheriff's car with one of his deputies. Behind them were the state police. And I believe at the time it was called the Texas Department of Public Safety. It still is called that. I don't know when they changed the name, but it was the Texas Department of Public Safety. And behind them was a car with Air Force officers in it. And what you have to remember, Levelland is 15, 20 minutes from Lubbock. And in Lubbock is Reese Air Force Base. And so these officers were from Reese Air Force Base. Now, according to the Project Blue Book files, the sheriff and his mini convoy never got within more than 900 yards of the thing, and all they saw was a red streak in the distance. Mm-hmm. Prior to the Air Force showing up to investigate, they showed up on Tuesday. This was a Saturday night. They showed up on a Tuesday. The sheriff was interviewed by a number of reporters. And in those stories, he talked about seeing a oval-shaped, football-shaped object that was bright red, glowing red. After the Air Force arrived, and that was a staff sergeant named Norman Barth, he came down from Ent Air Force Base, which is in Colorado Springs. He spent 7 hours in Levelland investigating this case, a whole 7 hours. I've spent more time in Levelland myself.
I was going to say, just that doesn't seem very, very long of an investigation, especially given what happened.
He talked to only 6 witnesses, not the multitude of witnesses, but the report from the sheriff in the Project Blue Book files talks about this streak of light in the distance, doesn't mention the shape or anything else. But after about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, the sightings ended there in Levelland and moved to White Sands Missile Range. And we had a couple of MPs there who saw an object. The Air Force, I believe, said that was the moon that they saw. They were hysterical because of the sightings there. They were so excited about UFO sightings in Levelland. They got caught up in the enthusiasm of it. Of course, this was 1957 when nobody had a cell phone and nobody had Facebook and nobody had Snapchat or any of that.
Yeah.
So there was no way they knew about what was going on in Levelland, which is 3 or 4 hours away from White Sands. They didn't know about it, but that was the Air Force explanation. 12 or 13 hours later, another 2 MPs also witnessed an object, and the Air Force wrote that off as Venus. Now, the interesting thing about the first one, it was Glenn Toy was the corporal in this sighting, mentioned to me when I interviewed him that they saw the object down below the horizon. I mean, there were mountains in the background and it got lower than the mountains, so it was silhouetted against the mountains.
Yeah.
So clearly it wasn't the moon, unless the moon landed in White Sands, and that would have been big news.
That would have been huge news.
Absolutely. And probably crushed their Jeep, not to mention anything else.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were interviewed by the Air Force a couple of days later. There were 4 MPs involved. Only 3 of them were interviewed. The fourth one, and I believe his name was Will Banks, he'd been given a 3-day pass. And anybody who's been in the military understands on a 3-day pass, you're limited to how far you can go. And you're subject to recall. So when the Air Force showed up to investigate and they said, well, he's on a 3-day pass, there was no reason for him not to come back to be interviewed. I believe the information I developed suggested he was in the hospital. That had something to do with the close approach of the UFO.
Yeah.
So that's November 2nd. Now we had a lot of sightings in Levelland. The Air Force reported that there were only 3 people who saw the object. And if you look at their file, you discover the names of at least 5 people who saw an object. And if you look beyond that, I found people at 13 separate locations that saw an object. So the Air Force kind of downplayed it. And that's what they did through this whole thing. Pedro Saucedo, well, his car had been repaired the day before. His pickup truck had been repaired the day before. And when they looked at it again, there was a small piece of metal that was caught in the distributor cap, and they of the rotor part of the distributor.
Yeah.
And they figured that might have shorted out his engine. And I'm thinking, yeah, that would be a good excuse, except for two things. When it worked really well until the object came by. And once the object left, it worked really well again.
Yeah. Because
that doesn't seem to answer the question.
Right. Because a mechanical defect just doesn't kind of come and go. I mean, it's going to be there all the time, and he would experience problems with that kind of problem in his distributor.
But there were other people who saw the object and reported the same thing. I think one of them was watched the object for 15 minutes, so he got a good look at the object. He had plenty of time to absorb what he was seeing. The Air Force ignored the people they didn't talk to, even though they could have talked to many, many people. The sheriff said that there were dozens of phone calls into the sheriff's office. We have the names of the witnesses at, like I said, 13 separate locations, but there were many more witnesses involved in this thing. Now, the interesting thing, a fellow named Don Burlinson. There's a lot of Dons in this story. You'll understand my confusion here in a minute.
Okay.
Don Burlinson, who lives over in Roswell, New Mexico, as a matter of fact, investigated the case around 2000. He went in and see what he could learn. Talked to the sheriff's widow, talked to the sheriff's daughter, learned a couple of things. One of them was that the sheriff had his car checked out the next day after the sightings. And Don talked to the mechanic, who said, yeah, the sheriff came in and we checked out the car to see if it was functioning properly. I can think of no reason for that to have happened the day after this unless his car stalled.
Mm-hmm.
And if his car stalled, it means the Department of Public Safety car stalled and the car with the Air Force officers in it stalled. But the Air Force officers drop out of the sighting. I can't find any reference to them other than one or two in newspapers about the Air Force officers being in the car, one of the cars. Barth apparently didn't. Well, I won't say that. Barth may have talked to them, but there was no official report made in the Project Blue Book files. So the sheriff had his car stalled. And the other thing that Burlinson found was that there was a rancher to the north of town, I believe it was north of town, reported a burned area on the ground. Burlinson couldn't talk to the rancher because he had died, but he talked to the daughter who accompanied her father out and saw the burned area. So we have firsthand witness to the burned area. Mm-hmm. The day after the sightings, the sheriff and the provost marshal from Reese Air Force Base drove around the area looking for burned areas on the ground. So you wonder if they found anything. According to the documentation, they didn't find anything, but we know that the sheriff knew of this one case. So we have a case where we've got the UFOs interacting with the environment. We have multiple independent witnesses. We have a burned area on the ground. So we have multiple chains of evidence into the sighting. Now you have to wonder if a proper investigation had been conducted in 1957. What would our discussion be today, as opposed to those of us interested in UFOs having to kind of piece this thing together years after the fact? But the documentation is there. The evidence is there. It's clearly a very extraordinary group of sightings. Barth and his pals in the Air Force decided that this was ball lightning caused this. Ball lightning is still a controversial concept.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
In 1957, it was even more controversial. So we're solving the UFO sightings with a very very controversial explanation. But the other thing is, ball lightning lasts a matter of seconds and is about 18 inches to 2 feet in diameter. So it's nothing like was described by the witnesses. I know of no instances where ball lightning has stalled a car engine. Lightning, as we all know, of course, driving toward a thunderstorm can fill your radio with static, but it doesn't cause your headlights to go out and it doesn't stall your car engine. So the explanation, and that's the explanation still in the Project Blue Book files today. If you go look that up online, you go to November 2nd, 1957, Levelland, Texas, and it says ball lightning as the explanation. That, in a rather large nutshell, is the case from Levelland, Texas in 1957.
Has there ever been, has there ever been that many car stallings, that many landings in any flap ever?
Yes. A couple of days later, November 6th, a fellow named James Stokes was driving near Oro Grande, New Mexico.
Yeah.
And for those of you unfamiliar with New Mexico, if you're driving from Alamogordo, which is 100 miles west of Roswell, to El Paso, you drive past Oro Grande, New Mexico. And he said that as he came over the hill there near Oro Grande, his radio began to fade out. And he thought, well, it's just the station fading. He tried to turn it up. And then his engine stalled. And he noticed a number of cars pulled over to the side of the road. So he joined them, 6 or 7 of them, I think, and watched he said an egg-shaped object sort of buzzed them over a period of time. Once it left, the cars all started. He talked to one fellow who had apparently taken pictures, but we've never found that guy. It would be wonderful to find him. But I'm not sure whether he continued on to El Paso and did his business and came back to Alamogordo or not. Anyway, he did. Once he got back to Alamogordo, he called his boss at Holloman Air Force Base and said, I've had this UFO sighting. Do you mind if I talk about it? And the major said, were you on duty? Was it on Holloman? And Stokes said no. And he said, well, tell anybody you want. We don't care.
Yeah.
So Stokes called his friends, Carl and Jim Lorenzen, who were the leaders of the Aero Phenomena Research Organization, which was based in Alamogordo at the time. And the Lorenzens took him to the local radio station where he was interviewed. The one thing they noticed was Stokes had a slight sunburn on part of his face and one of his arms. If you remember Richard Dreyfuss from Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah. Yep.
He had a much more defined sunburn type effect, but that's the idea. The sunburn effect faded in the matter of hours, but the Lorenzens saw it and the news director at the radio station saw it. He put the story on the air. The Air Force, of course, decided to smear Stokes, who was an engineer at Holloman Air Force Base. They said, well, he really wasn't an engineer. He didn't have a college degree in engineering and blah, blah, blah. But the interesting thing was he was hired by the Air Force as an engineer. He had 22 or 23 years in the Navy, and he was considered to be a very reliable, intelligent man. And he was promoted in the years that followed to more and more responsible jobs. But it was interesting to see the Air Force on one hand smearing the guy, trying to, well, he was pretending to be an engineer. He's embellishing his resume. And the people on the other side of the Air Force saying, no, he's hired as an engineer. He's working as an engineer. He does engineering things. But it was just their way to kind of belittle the whole thing. The problem with the case is he talked to 2 of the people whose cars were stalled, got their names, but nobody's been able to find them. And the guy that took the pictures would have been priceless at this point in the conversation. He was going to go to El Paso and sell them to a newspaper. I don't know what happened or how that didn't happen. Although it seems that both of those men that Stokes talked to worked at White Sands Missile Range, and that may have been one of the inhibitions to reporting it. The other one would have been the way Stokes was treated by the military and the news media at the time, suggesting, well, he was just in it to make some money and this sort of thing. And the first thing he did when he got back from El Paso or got back to town was go to the radio station. It turns out that's not true. So that was part of this November flap. In France in 1954, there were a lot of sightings with similar type environmental effects, and including a number of cases where people had seen beings from inside. And in a few cases where the beings pointed some kind of a weapon or something at the people and paralyzed them for a moment until they got away, and then they took off in their craft. In one of the cases, the guy called the police, who came out, and the object had landed on a railroad bed. And they were able to take measurements there and determine that the object weighed 30 tons. And there was a similar type flap in South America at the same time. So in 1954, we had a lot of this sort of thing going on. 1957, we had it. Since that time, there's been other cases of cars being stalled or power being knocked out, radio stations being knocked off the air, interference with television, that sort of thing. And then there's the well-known one of the side effects is animals reacting to the presence of a UFO, as if this magnetic field that is created
Yeah.
by the UFOs affects them more than it does humans, or alerts them to the coming of the flying saucers. So there are these kinds of cases with these electromagnetic effects, but they're not as common as just your regular UFO sighting.
Yeah, I do wonder if modern cars are affected as much as the older cars, because the older cars obviously were much simpler. Have you heard any kind of data on cars today?
Modern cars would be more affected because of all the electronics.
Yeah.
There's
One of the advantages
reason.
of the older cars is you had an electric radio, which got AM stations.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. But you get into the modern cars, and I don't know how many computers we have in those cars.
Oh boy.
Mine now, if I've got the cruise control on, mine now slows me down if I get too close to the car in front of me.
Yeah.
And all of that sort of thing. So yes, we still have this kind of sightings today where cars are stalled by it.
Okay.
One of the interesting side effects, and I've only got 4 or 5 cases like this, and one of them I didn't even mention in the book, I should have, is paint changing color on the cars. And in one case, the guy came home, and I can't remember whether the car was gray and turned green or if it was green and turned gray. But he came home with his car, he got out of it, his wife wanted to know if he'd bought a new car because the color was different. But that was by a close approach of a UFO. And there's like
I've never heard that. I've never heard that.
Neither had I until I started the research into this and came across that. But then we look at the Barney and Betty Hill case, which I didn't mention in the book, and they had spots on the trunk of their car where the paint had changed color. And so I've got 5 of these kinds of cases, but it's a couple of the times the car didn't, just part of it changed color. And in one case, I think it went back to its original color after a day or so. So there's those kinds of side effects as well. So we look at all of this sort of thing. Mark Rodiker did a study in 1985, Dr. Rodiker, the scientific director at the Center for UFO Studies, and put together some 400 cases of car stalling. And of course, as I was putting together the book, I used that as a resource, but had to look beyond that where there were other cases of electromagnetic effects. And yes, it proceeds into, I think the latest case in the book is like 2021 or 2020. It's something like that. So it's a phenomenon that continues. The first reported case, I'll mention this to give you an idea how long this has been going on. The first reported case was in 1909 in England. And a guy riding his motorcycle got close to a glowing object in the field, and the headlight went out. And once the object disappeared, the headlight came back on. So that's the first recorded case of a electromagnetic effect. And of course, it continues today. So we've got over 100 years of sightings that encompasses. But as I say, it's kind of a rare phenomenon. It doesn't happen a whole lot. So you have to take a look at that. And a lot of the UFOs, you can get a close approach to the UFO and there is no electromagnetic effect. So you have to try to wonder what the deal is with that.
Yeah.
But getting back to what you're saying, I think modern cars, because I work in the auto industry during the day and I deal with them on a daily basis, they are way more computerized. I mean, really, you could almost argue they're rolling computers at this point with an engine, cars. And I mean, everything's computer driven on a car, right down to your ABS system, to you name it. Even your radio is a computer. That's what it is.
But the thing is, an electromagnetic pulse from an atomic explosion, for example, will knock out all the electronics in your car.
Yeah.
The only difference seems to be here is the electromagnetic effect from the UFO, for the most part, is temporary. And once the UFO disappears, meaning the electromagnetic field is gone, then the car works properly. There have I had a thought there. The reason we suspect the electromagnetic effects is the Kenneth Arnold sighting from June of 1947. About 10 or 15 minutes after Arnold lost sight of the object, they passed over another area in Washington State near Mount Adams, and there was a prospector there, Fred Johnson, and he reported seeing the objects, and as they flew over, his compass began to spin. So there seemed to be an electromagnetic effect there spinning his compass. And Fran Ridge and a fellow named Eric Herr collected cases of specific compass interference. And I think they collected, I can't remember, it was 144 cases or 170 cases total. So that kind of reinforces the idea it's some kind of an electromagnetic effect, because of course a compass works off magnetism, and you
Yeah.
introduce a strong magnetic field to a compass and it's going to throw it off.
Yeah. It's going to spin.
Yes.
So, Kevin, do you feel that there's a lot of significance because of the tic tac? You know, he described the egg shape object is so similar to modern day sightings with the, the famous tic tac. Is that significant at all? Is that important to you as a researcher?
I don't think it's important. I know that there's many cases where the object is described as egg shaped.
Okay.
And in Levelland, as I said, Pedro Saucedo, I believe, described it as torpedo shape. Well, was the craft changing shape or anything? And I'm thinking, no, it's probably a more factor of the perception, which means if you look at a railroad tank car, for example, straight on, it's going to look like a big cigar-shaped object. If you move around to the edge of it and look at it at an angle, it may take on an egg shape. And if you stand right at the end and look at it, it's going to be circular. So the object isn't changing shape. It's merely where you happen to be and your perception of it when you look at it. The other thing is there's this bright glow around it, and that would, of course, affect your perception as well.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, you're right, because there would be optical illusions involved and angles involved. Plus, you're talking about a moving object that's glowing. So yeah, I could see what you're saying is people would see different things possibly.
And the Air Force, of course, attempts to make much of that, and I think the skeptics do too. Well, the changing shape of the objects, and I've often wondered if it was more matter of perception. And I would
assume so. I mean, we look at things from a distance, and we look at it close up. Obviously, will change. Our perception will change, and the shape sometimes will change too because of that different perspective we're having.
And if you see a disc-shaped object edge on, for example, it may look like a thin cigar-shaped craft or something like that. So the tic tac seems to be sort of a truncated cigar shape to me, and it really is just a matter of perception and that effect in that effect. So I think that we need to look at all of these factors when we're trying to determine where things fit into the grander scale.
Yeah.
Was there any geographic interesting thing around Levelland and Lubbock? I mean, is there some reason you think they were there?
I know of nothing in Lubbock or Levelland that would be of particular interest to a spacefaring race. When you talk about Roswell and we move over to New Mexico and the White Sands Missile Range, and you think, well, yeah, the first atomic bomb was dropped on New Mexico.
Yeah.
We had it was the White Sands Proving Grounds, I think, in 1947, with a lot of stuff being fired into the atmosphere showing our march into space. And of course, Roswell had the only atomic strike force in the world at the time as well. So that if you're a spacefaring race and you're worried about the hostility of the human race, that's where you're going to go take a look around. How much of a threat are we to them?
Yeah.
Are we progressing rapidly and deeper into space? And of course, we know that here we are in 2022, and we really haven't gone. I was going to say we haven't gone much beyond the moon, but I'm thinking of a manned flight. We've got a probe that's outside the solar system now, but it's been traveling since 1975, and they predict it will reach another star system in another 75,000 years. So, not exactly an immediate threat, but that's not to say that we might not figure something out and be able to take larger steps into space and much more rapidly. But if I'm a spacefaring race, this is one of the places I want to go to see what kind of threat they may pose to us. But I don't have nothing around Levelland that would do that. It's a part of the Permian Basin, which is a big, huge oil field from Levelland, I think, Midland area, all the way over to Roswell.
Okay.
So you've got this big oil basin there. I'm not sure if they would be interested in fossil fuels and if that has any relevance, but I don't think so. I don't know if them really congregating around oil fields and that sort of thing.
But don't you ever wonder, just as a human being, what in the world were they all there over those 2 nights for? Why there?
Well, I think it was only a single object.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't a series of objects. I think it was a single object being seen by multiple people at multiple locations over a period of a couple of hours. And then, of course, it seems to have gone on to the west toward White Sands. I think it's just a single object that we've got there. But the question still is, what would they be doing there for that long? What were they looking for?
Yeah.
And
what was the point of interest? Yeah, for them, what would have been the point of interest?
See, when
I've often wondered if it's more like a graduate study program, and they come down and they gather all this data, then they go home and analyze it for years and years and years. Not unlike our universities do, sending out graduate students with a professor to kind of gather data, archaeological data or anthropological data or chemical data or whatever the hell you need.
Yeah, it could be a fact that we're reading just too much into it. It could be just as simple as that. It could be a fact finding mission, and that was about it on their end.
Well, and there was a wonderful movie out called Morons from Outer Space. And the gag was that the people flying the UFOs, the flying saucer that crashed in England, I think it was, had no idea how it worked. They had no idea about the complexity. They could fly from point A to point B, but they had no ability to rebuild it. They didn't know anything about the construction or the electronics or anything like that. And think about that in today's environment. A lot of people drive cars and they have no idea how to fix them.
Yeah,
if something breaks. And in today's environment, as complex as they become, I think you have to be a trained mechanic to be able to fix them now. It used to be the idea of the Model A was it was supposed to be so simple that the farmer out in the boondocks could fix his car if it broke. Yeah. And in today's environment, there's just so much that can go wrong, and you need this diagnostic equipment to help you figure it out. So, that's kind of the idea. The guys that crashed in England, well, they didn't know what they were doing, and the scientists and the military are interrogating them as if they can give them all the secrets, and they just really have no clue.
Yeah, we just drive the thing. We don't know how it ticks. We just use it.
So was there anything really different about the Levelland, flap that happened there? That just struck you as being very different? And obviously, Kevin, I'm on a fishing expedition.
I'm trying to save all the secrets for the book so people run out and buy them.
Okay.
Then there's that. Yeah.
Give away all the secrets now. You don't have to buy the book. Yes, there's other stuff in there, people. I don't know what the significance is of them being in Levelland, but we can look to areas around the country and around the world where there have been a number of sightings that sort of are related to one another. In Lubbock, Texas, which is not all that far from Levelland, in 1951, there was a series of sightings there and culminated in the pictures taken by Carl Hart Jr. And by the way, just as an interesting aside, I was in Lubbock in the mid-1990s, was working on the Roswell case, and I got back to the hotel, and on a lark, I looked up Carl Hart Jr. in the phone book and found him. So I called him to talk to about the pictures that he had taken back in 1951. And what he said to me was, I still don't know what I photographed. He wasn't going to say it was a flying saucer, an alien spacecraft or anything, but he just said, I don't know what I'd seen. But we had the Lubbock lights, and we had the Phoenix lights. We've had sightings that grouped in one area at one time. Bentwaters in England in the 1980s, for example, had a series of sightings. According to John Burroughs, we know of 3 nights of sightings in Rendlesham Forest, but according to Burroughs, there were sightings prior to that and sightings after that that just didn't get covered because the U.S. military wasn't involved the way they were in the late December of 1980.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are concentrations like that. Again, France in 1954, we had a concentration of sightings in that area as well. So that's the way it works. And sometimes they're just sightings in one area for a day, and that's it, or 1 or 2 objects and 1 or 2 witnesses type thing.
So what in the world gets you kind of like unsettled? I mean, is there any case that just kind of you think about a lot because it's so weird, or something is just unsettling to you? It doesn't sit right?
I look at the Roswell case, of course, as being one of the most important cases. And I just completed a book called Understanding Roswell, which will be out here in a couple of months,
Oh, cool.
where we look at the case in depth. And I vacillate. 30 years ago, somebody asked me, was it alien? And I said, yes, absolutely, 100% sure. And then as I was doing the book, Roswell in the 21st Century, and looking at it as more of a cold case, realized that some of the witnesses that we had talked to turned out to be less than candid about their experiences. But there were some very good witnesses. And so the case wasn't quite as robust as it had been by eliminating some of those witnesses. But looking at it again, as I went through the materials once again for Understanding Roswell and followed up on some of this, it's the extraterrestrial is the only explanation left. Yeah. We've eliminated everything else, and we can thank the Air Force for most of that, because when they did their investigation in 1995, they eliminated everything except Project Mogul. Don Schmidt and I had pretty much eliminated everything, even including Project Mogul. But they were left with Project Mogul. That was the only thing they had. And the weather balloon that's photographed in General Ramey's office, that was the material supposedly brought from Roswell. Well, clearly that's a weather balloon and a ray wind target, which Mogul was made up of. So they could draw that conclusion. And they said, well, Mogul was so highly classified and nobody knew what was going on, and we had to keep this secret. But if you study the case, you realize that the balloon project going on in New Mexico wasn't classified at all. It was unclassified. Yeah. And pictures of the Mogul array appeared in the newspapers on July 10th, like 2 days after the announcement that Roswell captured a flying saucer. So Roswell is probably the penultimate case. And I think Levelland is a very important case because of the number of witnesses and the interactions with the environment. If we could have gotten some pictures, it would be even a better case than that. But
there seems to be a lack of hard evidence that was, do you think it was suppressed?
In Roswell, yeah, they got it all and were able to silence a lot of people for decades. And some of them wouldn't even talk later on. Edwin Easley, who was the provost marshal at Roswell in 1947, I talked to him a number of times. And the feeling I got from him was he wanted to help us, but he didn't want to violate his oath. He'd promised not to talk about it, and he didn't want to do that. But he tried to point us in directions that he didn't believe violated his oath. For example, I asked him about Mac Brazel, the man who found the original debris, being held in Roswell, and he easily told me, well, he was kept in the guest house, which is not exactly jail. But by the same token, if you're not allowed to leave, what else would you call it? But because that didn't seem to fit under the umbrella of the secrecy, that he didn't mind talking about that. And at one point I said to him, are we following the right path? Meaning Don and I on the right path. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, we think it was extraterrestrial. And he said, well, let me put it this way. It's not the wrong path. So he, in essence, was telling us, yeah, that's the right path. So the Roswell case is, but not really frightening, but is something that is important to understanding the UFO phenomenon, how it developed from 1947 to today. And Levelland, the Air Force investigation was, it wasn't ordered the way it was to be done, the way it was done, that it was incompetent. And I think it was ordered to be done that way. Yeah. The FBI apparently talked to the sheriff, which is why he was talking to Barth about the streak of light in the distance. It had been kind of set up. Don Berliner interviewed the sheriff in 1974. I think it appeared in a UFO magazine in 1975. And in that, the sheriff again talks about seeing the oval-shaped object. So we have him talking about that prior to the Air Force investigation. Then we have him talking about it years after the Air Force investigation. But in the Air Force file, it says it's just a streak of light. And I'm thinking you could have spent a good week in Levelland investigating this thing if you really wanted to do it. And I can find no interrogations of the Air Force officers who were involved on the night. I can find no reference to them in the Air Force files or anywhere else. I don't know who they are. And now we're at 1957, so we're literally decades after the fact, so it'd probably be impossible to trace them if we could even figure out who they were. With Roswell, we had one thing that was interesting, and that was the yearbook that they had produced in the summer of 1947. So we had a list of like 1,500 names. Now, not everybody in Roswell was involved in the recovery operation. And that sort of thing. We had a list of names. We knew who to call. We knew where to go. And
you at least had leads. Yeah, you had something. You had something to work with the Roswell. You didn't. The Levelland one seems like it's almost. I get the real feeling that the Air Force and the powers that be really wanted to put this behind them and move on, and not let it become a big deal.
If you read the correspondence in the file, and you see that they're talking about how they don't want to, the Air Force doesn't want to come out with a statement until NICAP, which is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, a civilian organization, or as we'd say now, an NGO, who studied UFOs. And there was Don Kehoe was the leader of that. And so now we've got like 4 Dons in this conversation already. Mm-hmm. But they didn't want to say anything because it's easier to respond to somebody than it is to put out your statement without that kind of a guidance. So when Kehoe came out and said there were witnesses at 9 locations, the Air Force immediately went after him and diverted the conversation, but from what they had seen and what had happened to how many witnesses were there. Mm-hmm. And the Air Force said there were only 3 witnesses to the object. Well, and as I said, I found witnesses at 13 separate locations that were involved in this. And according to what the sheriff said and what the sheriff told other people, there were many, many more witnesses who did not come forward and who did not have their names in the newspaper and who didn't end up in the police logs and that sort of thing. So they're impossible to find. And in fact, one of the guys, Frank Williams, disappeared like the next day. He called into the sheriff. And it was never clear in the documentation whether he called the sheriff or he actually went and saw the sheriff. It seems, you can make a case for either direction. Mm-hmm. But the next day, the Sunday, the sheriff began looking for him and couldn't find him anywhere, called the sheriff of the adjacent county where the guy supposedly called from or was when he saw the object. And that sheriff couldn't find any trace of him either. So he disappears from the story, even though we have his name. And again, I think it might be a reflection of how the Air Force and some of the news media were treating the witnesses, and they just didn't want to come forward. You go to Socorro in 1964 with Lonnie Zamora, and both the the Army officer who was involved, Captain Richard Holder, and the FBI agent, a guy named Arthur Burns, interrogated Zamora, who saw the landed craft in Socorro. Yeah. Told them, Holder said, don't talk about the symbol you saw, not to suppress the information, but his idea was if others came forward and talked about the symbol, if they couldn't reproduce it the way Zamora did, well, that would tell him something. Yeah. And Burns suggested he not talk about the alien creatures he had seen because he would end up as the butt of endless jokes, which of course turned out to be the truth. But their advice was based on the idea that, one, you need to withhold some of the information simply to have a check against others who come forward, and the other part of it was to avoid you're gonna open yourself up to all this ridicule if you mention these sorts of things. The problem is the story that there were alien creatures got out almost immediately, and so there was really no backtracking on that for Zamora. Mm-hmm. But the point simply is, well, in 1947, even we just started the UFO thing in 1947, and one of the newspaper articles we found, I think it was from, I was going to say Kansas newspaper. It may have been anywhere else. It says, but the headline was something to the effect: "Flying saucers seen in 38 states except Kansas." The gag was Kansas was a dry state. You couldn't buy alcohol in Kansas.
Gotcha.
So you didn't have drunks seeing flying saucers, you see. So, I mean, even at that point, within literally days of the first sightings, reported sightings nationally in the newspapers in 1947, you already have this curtain of ridicule being
and it's just to dig at any credibility that might happen. Yeah, I mean, just to keep tearing down the credibility of anyone that might come forward.
Well, one of the things they did with the MPs at White Sands was they made fun of their ages. They said, well, they're only 20, 21 years old. They weren't well educated. They weren't well trained, although they mentioned they showed up in immaculate uniforms. And I'm thinking, 20, 21 years old, and you're saying they're incompetent, or they're undertrained, or they're not capable of making observations. And I'm thinking, I was 19 years old when I was in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot and aircraft commander. What kind of responsibility are they given to teenagers?
Yeah.
And these guys, the other great gag about Vietnam is we had a guy we called Papa, because he was the oldest guy in the flight that flew with the flight on a regular basis. We called him Papa. He was 23.
Oh, geez, man. You guys really were kids. I mean, really, when you look back, I mean,
They were, the Army had a program, and I don't know if it's still in effect, but when I got out of high school, there was a program. If you had a high school education and you could pass the tests, they would train you as a helicopter pilot. And so we had an awful lot of youngsters in. And I remember sitting in a briefing in basic training before we got to flight school. And they were showing this movie about the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and making fun of them because their army was filled with teenagers. And I'm looking around the room at guys that were 18 and 19 years old. And I said, yeah, us too.
Yeah.
So
it was kind of kids fighting kids is what you're saying, Kevin.
Well, but the other thing that I noticed, I felt that our training was so good that I really didn't have a moment of fear in Vietnam, except the first mortar attack I was in. And then I didn't know what to expect. But later on, we got so blasé about it, we'd listen to see where the mortars were going. Are they walking toward us or away, to determine whether or not we wanted to go to the bunker? So you got pretty blasé about it. But when I had an engine failure, so we're falling out of the sky, and I'm running through my mind the emergency procedure. And every time I say, put the collective full down. Well, I'd already done that. Roll the throttle off. I'd already done that. I did everything automatically when the engine quit. I knew exactly what had happened, and put the aircraft down with no damage. It was no big deal. We were so well trained. And the thing that always cracked me up is we would shoot auto rotations, the practice for engine failures. We would shoot them to the ground. But if you were in a civilian flight school, they would shoot them to a 3-foot hover. And I'm thinking, what happens with that last 3 feet?
Yeah.
We knew how to put it on the ground. We shot them to 3-foot hovers as well, but we could put them on the ground, and I put the aircraft on the ground with no damage whatsoever. So
it's amazing, Kevin. That is truly amazing.
Actually, it's not.
For someone like me that's never flown a helicopter, and having that kind of pressure at that young of an age, that is truly commendable.
But that's the point. We were so well trained before we were turned loose. We got out of flight school with over 200 hours of flight time. And before you were made an aircraft commander, you had at least 300 hours in country. So by the time you were turned loose with a helicopter, you had 500 hours of flight time. And we would practice the auto rotations, and you're flying with the fighter, you're flying the gunships, you're doing these other missions. And so you're pretty well trained, and you pretty well know what you're doing. So like I said, when the engine quit, I knew exactly what to do. I didn't even have to think about it. And that is what amazed me about my experiences in Vietnam. We were all that well trained. We all knew what we were doing. So, I just look at it that way. But the point simply is the Air Force is making fun of the MPs who are 20, 21 years old. And I'm thinking by that time, you're much more mature than you are when you're 19. Yeah. And I talked to Glenn Toy, and of course it was many, many years after the fact. So he was much, much older, but I got the impression of a very intelligent guy. And, I think like the rest of us, you're a high school graduate. Yeah. I've since have gone to college, obviously, afterwards. Yeah. But I think the level of formal education, when you move into the military environment, the only thing the formal education does for you, if you can read at a high school level and comprehend what you're doing, it provides you with some of the tools, and then the Army trains you in exactly what you have to do, so that you learn how to fly the helicopter, you learn how to drive the tank, or you learn how to repair the tank in the helicopter. or that sort of thing. And you're so well trained by the time you're turned loose that you're very good at your job. And if you're not very good at the job, you're sent somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. But then a discount, it just sounds like they were trying to, again, take credibility away from these young men's statements.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And diverting the conversation to an argument over the number of witnesses as opposed to what they'd seen, and then put out this nonsensical statement that it was ball lightning. And your average citizen has no clue as to what ball lightning is. Does it even exist? I've never heard of ball lightning. What's that?
Yeah.
And doesn't realize that if it does exist, it's very short-lived and it's not very big. And you're not going to have it showing up over a period of 2 or 3 hours in one location. There would be one instance of it, and who knows how many people would have seen it. But you don't have the kind of thing you have at Levelland. So ball lightning does not explain anything.
But Kevin, it's a narrative they can control.
Yes.
And that's why ball lightning, because the average public is not going to know anything, if anything, about ball lightning. And when they do explain what it is, they can explain it the way they want to explain it and control that narrative. Well, it could have been ball lightning. This is how this works. And this is what people have seen. Other people have seen ball lightning. And so they create that air, a shadow of a doubt of what it was. Oh, okay, it was ball lightning. It's got to be the government. The government's got to be right. We want to trust the government, don't we?
Well, in 1957, it was even more so. I think in today's environment, we realize that the government lies to us all the time.
Oh, all the time.
That the politicians have agendas, and it's not necessarily to represent their constituency, but to advance their personal lives or their party's platform, as opposed to doing what their constituents may want. But in 1957, people were more willing to accept what they were told by the military and what they were told by the media.
Well, sure. When you think
about
it,
an explanation for this, so we can move on now from this.
Right, because we were only 12 years removed from World War II at that point. By 57. So, I mean, we were still...
Or the Korean War as well in 1953.
Yeah. So people were still the government's got to be right. We trust in the government mentality. You're right. You're 110% right. Now today, with the advent of social media and people questioning the government, a cover-up like that, of that magnitude, or that easily cover it up, would never... I would want to say it would never fly. No pun intended.
Oh, I didn't get there was a pun there. Well, I think the thing is, if a Levelland event happened today, the way it did in Levelland, and that was why I mentioned social media early on, is you would have people with their cell phones out videoing the thing. Mm-hmm. And then they would post it immediately to Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever platform they wanted to. And so the government could say, well, there's nothing going on there. And they say, well, what about all these videos that have shown up and all these witnesses who are talking about having seen this thing? In 1947 with Roswell and in 1957 in Levelland, the average citizen couldn't find the witnesses, couldn't find them. I mean, I don't know how many times I've looked somebody up on the internet and found information about them and was able to chat with them about their UFO sightings and that sort of thing. The information is, everybody's on the internet, and you can find anybody you want on the internet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You just have to be sure you get the right guy.
Yeah.
Well, and I mentioned that because I was called into an office one day because a guy named Kevin Randle had been picked up for drunk driving. And they were wondering, they wondered if it was me. You've been picked up for drunk driving. Turned out the guy lived in Florida. And when he was picked up for drunk driving, I happened to be in Iraq. So I could say, well, no, I got a pretty solid alibi here, pal. But it was another guy with the same name. And when we were checking the security clearances before we deployed into Iraq, we had one of our soldiers who had the same name and the same birth date of a felon. And they were hesitant we were trying to prove it's not the same guy. Check the social security numbers. It's not the same guy. And we had a hell of a time getting his security clearance through, because not only did he have the same name, he had the same birth date. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you don't know how many times that's happened. When we were looking for Naomi Self, the Glenn Dennis nurse, alleged nurse, We found 4 Naomi Selfs. I mean, there's not a very common name, Naomi Self.
No, not really.
4. And we found 4. And of course, none of them was the right one because Glenn Dennis made up the whole story, but that's a whole nother argument. But yeah, the Air Force in that time frame was able to divert the conversation. The news media accepted what they said without question. And they still do that today, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, whether or not they want to accept what you say as the gospel and print it that way, or if they'll question you about what you're saying. I think in 1957, the Air Force would come on and give the explanation, and the news media might have some interesting questions. Well, did it do this? Did it do that? But they wouldn't press it the way that they would do today in today's, or could do in today's environment, to get additional information. It was just so easy to hide this kind of information in that era. I did a book called UFOs in the Deep State and outlined exactly how this works, especially related to UFOs. And you can expand that to other aspects you might have an interest in, and how the deep state is able to manipulate the situation and manipulate the data, and how they can even keep presidents from learning about UFOs or things they don't want the president to know about.
Sure.
And I would have said, before I did that book, I would have said, well, if I'm the president and I go to the director of Central Intelligence and I said, tell me what you can about UFOs. And the director of Central Intelligence says, sorry, Mr. President, you have a high enough security clearance, I can't tell you. My next words would have been, you're fired, bring in your deputy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, but I was doing UFOs in the deep state. I got to talking to a couple of people, and they said what happened with Jimmy Carter when he came in as the president-elect, and that's kind of the key here, president-elect. He called in George H.W. Bush, who was the director of Central Intelligence. And Jimmy Carter says, tell me about UFOs. And Bush says to him, I'd like to remain as the DCI when you are inaugurated. And Carter said, I've got my own guy coming in. And Bush's response, well, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I can't tell you about that. You don't have the clearances yet. You're not the president yet. You'll be the president in 6 weeks. Take it up with your guy.
Yeah.
And I think the other side of the coin, the way you do that, and we've seen an example of this, is you don't really dodge the question. You say, well, Mr. President, there are a number of agencies involved. We're going to have to pull that information together, and we'll put together a report for you and get back to you. And that's what they pulled with the Congress and saying, well, we're going to have a report for you on June 25th. And we get to June 25th, and what do we get? A third-rate high school report.
Yeah.
That tells us nothing. Well, we looked at 144 reports. What does that mean? Is that 144 incidents? Is it 15 incidents with multiple reports? What's that mean? And they said, well, we'll get back to you in 90 days, which would have been October of 25th of last year. And where are we? We've heard nothing since then. So they've dodged the question. They had a mandate to do this and do that, and they put together something at the last minute and said, we'll get back to you in 90 days, and we still have nothing.
Yeah, just to appease Marco Rubio at the time that wanted to know more about UFOs.
Well, we do have supposedly the setting up a new agency to investigate UFOs. Of course, we've been through that before. In 1948, when we began Project Sign, which was the official investigation into UFOs. And here we are 70 some years later. And now we're going to have another investigation. Yeah, it's going to work out really, really well, I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm sure they're going to be very forthcoming.
But it's just a way of dodging the question. And I think you have to wonder about some manufactured crises. If you saw the movie Wag the Dog, where they manufacture the crises, divert attention from the possible scandal surrounding the president. And you have to wonder if that hasn't been pulled here. And I think specifically with Jimmy Carter, with Bill Clinton, pushing for answers on UFOs. And the next thing you know, he's involved with an intern. And now we're not talking about UFOs and flying saucers. We're talking about the intern.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So the conversation's been diverted, and the president's attention's been diverted into this arena that really isn't all that important when you look at the operation of the country. But that's what they managed to do. They managed to change the conversation, change the dynamic, or move the needle to a different point. And it's been working ever since 1947.
It's all about diversion tactics. Don't look at the right hand while the left hand does what it will do. But that's been the ongoing theme for a very long time, like you mentioned, of diversion tactics to keep our collective thoughts away from those subjects that are sensitive, such as UFOs.
And they do just enough to seemingly answer the questions. The Air Force didn't like the UFO investigation after about 1953, when the CIA suggested they'd do something else. And again, if you go through the Project Blue Book administrative files, you find all this correspondence from people trying to move successfully moving the Project Blue Book out of the Air Technical Intelligence Center and the intelligence function to everything's coming from the Office of Public Affairs, which is not necessarily, or not as prestigious as the intelligence letterhead. And then you look deeper and you see the Air Force has paid the University of Colorado $550,000 to investigate UFOs, but there are letters, and one of them's called the Hippler letter, from a lieutenant colonel named Hippler to the Condon Committee project officers, saying, here's what we'd like you to find. There's no national security implication. There is no reason to continue the investigation because there's nothing of scientific value that can be learned, and the project should be closed down. Yeah. And we get through the 18 months of the Condon Committee investigation, and what do they find? Those three things. And they even knew it wasn't true because they got caught up in a national security investigation. There was a series of sightings, I think it was in March of 1967, if I remember the date correctly, around Belt, Montana. Well, what's important about Belt, Montana? Malmstrom Air Force Base. It's got a huge field of missiles. There's flights of missiles scattered all around that area of Montana. And one of the flights is shut down from outside. 10 missiles are taken offline in a matter of minutes. Supposedly that's impossible. You can't do that. It's set up so you cannot physically affect the electronics and the missiles from the outside. And yet that's what happened. That becomes a matter of national security, because if you announce that's happened, no matter what the cause of it was, you've told the Soviets at the time, you can shut down our missiles from the outside.
Yeah, so exactly.
It's national security. And one of the Condon Committee investigators was at Belt, Montana, talking to the UFO officer there, and mentioned the missiles. And the UFO officer was stunned that he knew about it. He said, well, I can't talk to you about that. It's a matter of national security. And so when they say there was no national security implications in there, they knew they were lying about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yet that's what we're told. Now we're down 50 years from the Condon Committee, a half century of listening to the nonsense, where skeptics say, well, we had a scientific investigation of this and they found nothing. And I'm thinking, did you look at the one sighting that was labeled as a natural phenomenon so rare it had never been seen before or since? Wouldn't you think that one might be something of scientific value to learn exactly what that was? Right. And is that any kind of an explanation?
Yeah.
30% of their cases were unidentified, but we've identified there's nothing to flying saucers.
When was the last time that happened, Kevin, where the silos were, shut down?
It apparently it happened twice at Malmstrom.
Right.
But there are other cases around that. Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming had a similar circumstance some years later as well. I talked to one of the guys who was involved in that, or was aware of what happened there. Robert Hastings has done a book called UFOs and Nukes, I believe it is. And his whole investigation was kind of around the idea of the UFOs and their monitoring, surveillance of our atomic capabilities. So I think that, it's still kind of an ongoing thing, but our missile defenses have become a little bit more sophisticated, and our capability for response is much more sophisticated than it was a half a century ago.
Do you think they upgraded all the equipment after they realized that a UFO could hover over the gate and shut everything down? Or do you think they just ignored it and said, there's nothing we can do?
Oh, well, according to the Air Force, it wasn't related to a UFO, and they found some kind of a spurious signal that had gotten inside the command facility, I believe, and that's what shut the missiles down. And they had to bring them back online one at a time over a period of several hours. But they supposedly identified that and corrected for it. But if it was a UFO, and there were UFOs all over the area of Belt, Montana at the time, and there's all kinds of sighting reports from the area, both in the newspapers and in the Project Blue Book files. It just stays away from the idea that the missiles were affected from the outside. So I'm sure they work to harden the sites even more so. An electromagnetic pulse, that if you detonate an atomic bomb in the atmosphere, it will take out all the electronics in a large area. I mean, all of the electronics, and supposedly the missiles are hardened, so that doesn't happen to them. You've got to actually hit the silo or be pretty close to it to take the missile out, and you've got to do it for each missile, and they're not all grouped together very close. They're scattered all over the countryside. So, but I'm sure they looked at that carefully and made upgrades to it. And I think they've changed somewhat our policy on strategic response.
Did Russia have any similar experiences that we know of, where their missiles were shut down or flipped?
I have heard that, but I haven't seen anything comprehensive about it. There's a number of people who looked at an opportunity to go through the former Soviet Union's files. Klaus Sven, who's a Swedish UFO researcher, and I talked to him just a week ago about some of this, and he had an opportunity to go through the former Soviet Union's files on UFOs. I was more interested in the ghost rockets, which had affected Scandinavia in 1946. If there was any suggestion the Soviet Union was behind that, and he said, Klaus said, no, there was nothing that he could find to suggest that. They really don't know what the ghost rockets were. And
can you explain what they are to our audience, Kevin?
The ghost rockets,
yes,
basically flying saucers seen in Sweden it started according to him with some sightings back as early as the 1930s, but they were more just like balls of light and things seen in the distance. When you get to 1946, they began to see report cigar-shaped craft, and a number of them were seen to fall into lakes, but they never found any wreckage or anything when they made an attempt to find it. And according to him, the objects, these sorts of sightings continued on until the 1990s. But it was just people seeing cigar-shaped crafts flying over Sweden. And the idea at the time was, well, this was the Soviet Union attempting to intimidate the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, and Denmark. But there was never any evidence found. And when we had an opportunity, and they say we, meaning the Western world, had an opportunity to review the Soviet Union files on these sorts of things, which is not to say there wouldn't be something that was still hidden away, but they could find no evidence that the Soviet Union was behind the ghost rockets. I just didn't really ask him about the possibility of the Soviet Union having a missile silo shut down the way we did. There was a sighting from Iran in 1975, I think it is, where the Iranian Air Force attempted to intercept the UFOs over a period of several hours. And as the fighters got close, the electronics began to fail on the fighters, and they would turn away, and then the electronics would come back. So it's pretty famous sighting. And I think there were a number of attempted interceptions of the UFO, and when they got close to it, the electronics began to shut down, so they had to turn away. So yeah, we have these kind of reports from around the world, from other countries, affecting both the military aircraft and the atomic weapons.
So, we've had these milestone events like Levelland and Roswell and the Phoenix Lights that have really become famous. When was the last milestone type UFO event?
There's probably a couple of them I can think of, and that would be Stevensonsville. And it was that 2008. I think Chicago O'Hare was 2008.
Yeah.
So we it's like that. there are other sightings that are kind of interesting, but they haven't gotten to play. There's reporting of the UFOs is pretty much cyclic, and you can see it coming and going, and the interest wanes. And we peaked in 1997, for example, with the Roswell celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash, and then interest in UFOs dropped off, and then it begins to climb again. So we have to look at all of that sort of thing when we look at that. So sometimes we find interesting cases that were overlooked at the time they were created or made or observed. I think of Array, New Mexico in 1949, when Charles Moore, one of the guys involved with Project Mogul, as a matter of fact, had a wonderful sighting in New Mexico with him and a number of other military personnel involved. But it was kind of limited. But what was key here is Moore made a number of observations using the equipment. They were there to, they were watching their weather balloons and that sort of thing through all kinds of an array of equipment. And Moore reported it to his boss, who reported it up the chain of command, and they put out a notice, here, based on this, here's what we want you guys to look for. And so we have the Array, New Mexico sighting as kind of a single event. And yet, based on the correspondence and the documentation that was going on, clearly things had gone on prior to Moore's sighting and gone on after Moore's sighting, but we just haven't collected all that information because a lot of it seems to disappear when we get to it. I don't know why the Array, New Mexico sighting was in the files, but it was, and we could look at that. I did an article for the MUFON Journal, I think it was in the January issue, that talks about that sighting specifically and mentions these sorts of things that were associated with it. So there's been any number of cases like that where we can look at a series of events in a specific area and find a lot of other events around it that are interesting. And that's, that's what happened in Levelland, what's happened in Roswell. It's what happened in Rendlesham Forest, for example. So we've got those kinds of events, yes.
It's just, you are a walking encyclopedia.
Man.
Gosh, Joel, we've never had a guest on that.
It's amazing. It truly is. It is just fascinating stuff.
So how would you what would be your the Kevin Randle fantasy of how this whole thing comes to an end? Full disclosure, does it come from the aliens? Does it come from the U.S. government? Do you ever think, okay, this is where I'd like it to end? If you were writing a movie, how would you want it to end, Kevin?
It's not going to come from the U.S. government. They have no motivation to release the information. And I think the deep state protects the information because if you let that information out, then you've reduced your power and your financial rewards. So they're never going to let that happen. They are at the mercy of the aliens. If the aliens land and said, here we are, that's it. Now we know, it's full disclosure.
Yeah.
Yeah. In intelligence, one of the things we learned in intelligence was you don't admit to anything. The other side may have the same information you do, but you deny everything until they bring out what they know. And the best example is when Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union flying his U-2, and Dwight Eisenhower was there at the United Nations. I don't know if he was really at the United Nations, but he was making speeches of, we're not spying on the Soviet Union. We're not doing anything like that, knowing full well that they may have the wreckage. And of course, the Soviets came out and said, yeah, here's your pilot and here's your wreckage. But the thing was, Powers was supposed to destroy the aircraft before he was shot down, when the craft was disabled, he was supposed to destroy the aircraft in flight. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to do that too. No, I'm punching out of that puppy. I'm gone.
Right.
But that was supposed to be what he did. So he kind of, I guess, violated the rules by allowing the Soviets to catch the airplane and him together. But that's the point. The attitude was we deny everything until the other side shows you the proof, and at which case, we can't deny it anymore. And that's where we are in the UFOs, and we've been that way for 75 years or more, where they can deny everything. We can point to all these cases, but we don't have the ultimate proof. We don't have the captured flying saucer. We don't have the bodies of the crew. We have great testimony. We have interaction with the environment. We have some debris. that is interesting. But, is that enough to convince you it's extraterrestrial in nature, that there's aliens coming to Earth? For some people, it's way more than enough. And for other people, it's not enough. They want that alien body. They want that spacecraft.
But for some people,
just hang on a second, Joel, and then I'll get off and let you talk. But if you were to see a situation that would make you really happy, like what would you, if we had like big motherships parked all over the cities, would you feel, this is the way I always pictured it would end? Do you have a fantasy of how you want it to end, Kevin?
Did you just watch Independence Day?
Sure. No, I didn't, but I'm just wondering how.
It's big ships parked over the various cities.
What do you think? How do you think it might end? Or maybe it never will.
I think what I would like happen is say, hey, Kev, come along. Let's go. Let's take a ride. I'm on board. Let's go.
Yeah.
I would like to travel among the stars and see what else is out there and see an alien world. But I don't see that happening. And I think the next best scenario is we get the aliens, whomever they are, landing and say, here we are.
Okay.
We've got this marvelous technology, which of course is going to radically alter our civilization, because anytime a technologically superior civilization meets a more primitive civilization, it radically alters that primitive situation, the mere introduction of the technology.
Yeah.
And we can see all kinds of examples from our own history. When the Europeans arrived in the New World with their weapons and their metallurgy, a steel pot is a much better cooking vessel than a clay pot, and the indigenous people didn't know how to make steel or didn't know how to make the metals that they needed to do that, or show up with the weapons. They couldn't reproduce the weapons. They could take them, but if they broke, they couldn't fix the parts. They didn't know how to fix them. And the technology radically altered those civilizations.
Very true. That and the implications. There's a lot of implications for disclosure, and financials, one of them. You also have religion. That would be another one implication. Things would definitely be changing.
Well, Kevin, do you think if the aliens did land and made themselves very well known, do you think it would have negative impact on Earth, on us?
I think a lot of people would say, this has been going on for 75 years. It hasn't affected my life at all. Why should I care? Yeah. I think the people who are going to be most concerned about it are those who are in the power structure, because it's going to change the social dynamics of the power structure that way. And they are fearing for their continued power. And I think that's how the deep state, why the deep state continues to deny these things are going on. They're protecting their own power, their own structure. And you have to remember that when we look at our government, the way it's formed is, we have a new administration come in at least every 4 years, maybe every 8 years, depending on the way the elections go. But you look at who's being appointed into not the upper level, the cabinet level people, but the bureaucrats in the State Department, who's in that, and you're looking at guys and women who have been around since the Clinton administration.
Yeah.
And they're still in there. They've now moved up there, and they're now in the power structure, and they realize that to maintain that position, they've got to maintain this secrecy. And I think that's one of the reasons we don't get disclosure, and why they continue to deny that these things exist, is they're protecting their own power.
Well, nothing's a bigger motivator than self-preservation.
And and the other thing is, I think we're in a situation today, specifically today, because we have all these ancillary issues going on that demand the attention of the government. I don't think all of it is related to trying to keep the information about flying saucers suppressed, but it still works the same way. We've got to deal with the COVID virus. We've got to deal with Ukraine. We've got to deal with inflation. We've got to deal with the energy. We've got to deal with all of these things. And we don't have time for what's new in the world of flying saucers.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
What's with a lot of people that I talk to about UFOs, only know of the one crash, Roswell, or the one supposed crash. I mean, but there's been numbers of them reported. Do you buy into the fact that there's been, 20, 30 crashes around the world of UFOs?
Well, first of all, your number is very, very small. I found when I did crash when UFOs fall from the sky, I think I list 110 crashes in there.
Wow.
But if you ask me how many there really were, 3 or 4 years ago, I might have said a handful, 4 or 5. And I was thinking of Kecksburg. I was thinking of Kingman. I was thinking of Shag Harbor. And in today's environment, I said, well, we have Roswell. The Las Vegas crash, I think, is pretty well explainable now by a bolide. And that sort of thing, having looked at that in depth over a number of years. Shag Harbor, I think of more as an emergency landing as opposed to a crash. This went into the Shag Harbor, obviously, the water there, and apparently maneuvered its way out after a week or so. It disappeared. They couldn't get down to it, to the depth of it, and it maneuvered its way out after about a week or so. Kecksburg, and I know Stan Gordon is going to yell at me, but I just think that's a bolide too. I think the evidence is pretty clear on that. Kingman turned out to be a hoax, and it started with a guy named Arthur Stanzel, I think is his name. Moore identified. No, it wasn't Moore. It was I forget the investigator who did it. He called the guy Fritz Weaver, and it really Arthur Stanzel. I can see I can see the magazine article in my mind, but I can't see the author's name. But that developed out of there, and then you get into the background of Stansel, and you realize he's telling people, well, when I drink a little bit, I start telling stories. And he had a couple of teenagers interview him about the UFO crash. And he said he'd had a couple of martinis before they came over to talk to him. So he was just spinning tales. I think that's the way it went. And when we got the name and we got the location and that sort of thing, we were able to determine that it probably didn't happen. So when we look at that, and if we had, like I said, I found 300 crashes. I think one of them was probably a missile from White Sands. Most of them were like single witness. Del Rio in I don't know, Del Rio in 1948, or was it 1950 or 1954? The witness kept changing the date. But the point is that was single witness. You only had this one guy. Who claimed to be a retired Air Force colonel. It turned out he had been an E4 in the Army. Months. He was not a colonel. He was not a fighter pilot. He wasn't anything he said he was. And he kept changing the story and eventually claimed that he'd been to the scene of 7 crashes. I'm thinking, yeah, that was good luck on your part. But I think that if they were falling in the numbers it is reported, we'd be having a different conversation now, because there's no way they could have hidden that many, even if the the U.S. government was good at hiding the things. The Canadians may not have been, or the Brazilians, or the Russians, or the Germans, or name a country. It would have leaked out, and it would have leaked out in a way that would be obvious that these things are going on. And at this point, we don't have that kind of information. I think that we have Roswell, which was probably the first one, and maybe the only one that kind of set the tone for the investigations by the military that took place over the next, it's been taking place up until today. So I think there's very few.
What about the rumors that 2 objects hit, and that's what caused the Roswell crash, and that there was another UFO that was Stan Friedman's theory, and the reason he'd created that is back in 1978, after Jesse Marcel came out and talked about the flying saucer crash. Friedman found a fellow named Barney Barnett. Friedman had talked to Barnett's relatives, Vern Maltese, and talked about a crash over in the plains of San Augustine. And they manipulated the data. I say they, Moore, and I'm sure how much manipulation Friedman had in it, but they manipulated the data so it would be 1947. And the only way you can explain 2 crashes is they must have collided.
And if there was a crash on the plains of San Augustine where it supposedly came down and Barney Barnett saw the thing, it didn't happen in 1947. I talked to Fleck Danley, who was Barnett's boss in 1947, and he was unclear when it happened. I know more when he talked to him, managed to get him to pin it down to 1947. But we found a diary that Ruth Barnett had kept. Apparently the only year she kept a diary, somebody given her a daily reminder book. The insurance companies used to pass these things out, and she religiously kept a diary for the whole year of 1947. So on the dates this supposedly happened, we know exactly where Barney Barnett was and what he was doing. He was not on the plains of San Augustine seeing a flying saucer. And Stan said, well, you wouldn't have told his wife about this, and she wouldn't have put it in a diary. And yet they talk about how Barnett supposedly told relatives at a Thanksgiving dinner in 1947 about the flying saucer crash out there. But again, there's nothing in the diary about that.
Yeah.
So I think that the idea there was a collision of two objects is not true. It has nothing to do with the Roswell case. If there was an event on the plains of San Augustine, it did not happen in 1947 and probably was not a crash.
Man,
Interesting.
That is very interesting.
Has there ever been a crash or a supposed crash in a more populated area where, there's been tons of witnesses?
The only thing that came close was the Las Vegas story, but it was seen to kind of explode in the sky over Las Vegas, and it came down supposedly near Mesquite, Nevada, which is right on the border between Arizona and Nevada. And it just didn't, is that right? In Arizona, Nevada, or Nevada and Utah? Well, anyway, Mesquite's there at the very, very eastern edge of Nevada. And if you, when you leave Mesquite, you leave Nevada. But no wreckage was ever found. And as I said, I think that case probably was a bolide, given some of the stuff that I've learned since then, when I first investigated the case back in the 1990s.
Jeez. Really, really interesting stuff. I cannot believe. Look at that, Doug. Wow, we are already darn near out of time.
Yeah.
Jeez, did that ever go by quick?
So where can people find you and your books? And
well, I don't want them to find me personally.
Okay.
However, if they, a lot of the stuff we've talked about tonight, you can find additional information at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. If you're interested in the Vietnam stuff, it's www.vietnamgroundzero, all one word, all lowercase, vietnamgroundzero.blogspot.com. And I think there's a link on the UFO blog to the Vietnam blog, which is the relatively true stories of my adventures in Vietnam. The books are available at Amazon. The Levelland book is out right now. You can get it at Amazon. And they're in the process of putting together a audio book, I believe, but you can get it as an ebook, or you can get a hardback, you can get a paperback. UFOs in the Deep State, the same way. You can find that at Amazon. And if you're interested in that aspect of it, I did a book, as I said, the Encounter in the Desert, about the Socorro landing. It's got some additional information that hadn't been well published about that. And if you just look down, you can find my science fiction novels and my action adventure books and everything else. So there you go.
Man, busy, Kevin. You are truly busy, and thank you for taking the time out to come talk to Doug and I tonight.
Well, I'm retired now, so I can chat with guys about UFOs for a while.
Well, we definitely have to have you on. And this was our last show where it's audio only, so we'll have to get back on when we go live with video.
Right, it'll be something cool, definitely cool. Well, we got to get out of here, guys. So until next time, take care of each other, love each other, and keep looking at the skies. You just never know what you're gonna see. But if you do, report to Kevin.